I am a pariah among the chosen ones, oh yes. But never mind. You aren't one of us, and I shouldn't even be talking to you about this. Promised eternity and given nothing. Always promised. Constantly reassured and caressed, and the blinding hypocrisy is making my teeth grind. Grinding into crumbling, into mumbling, no murmuring. I'm just prey. I won't pray. Pleas and pleading will not sate the needing. I am not in the fold despite what I'm told, surrounded yet alone. I fear the unknown. I cannot exist, and it's death to resist. That was a poem by Micah Losh, taken from the start of chapter 4 in his recently published memoir, Mentally Diseased. The title of the chapter is Disfellowshipping, something that those who have left the Jehovah's Witnesses will know all about at great personal cost. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast. In this mini-series, I talk with Micah about his childhood loss of a parent, ill mental health exacerbated by a hypocritically toxic high-demand religious group, Micah's experiences of attempting suicide and his painful journey through disfellowshipping, deconstruction, and speaking out publicly as someone now considered to be, by his former religious group no less, mentally diseased. For early access to full-length ad-free episodes, you can find me at patreon.com/thecultvault and support the show from as little as £1 a month. A massive shout out to Jonathan, newest patron and supporter of the show. Welcome and thank you for your support. Without the continued support of donors and patrons, and those who bravely share their stories, this show wouldn't exist. Thank you all so much. Please be warned that this episode comes with sensitive themes and will include details of suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, and other difficult subject matter. Listener discretion is advised. For support on the subject of suicide, you can call 998 in America or follow the link in this episode description for a list of countries and the suicide support numbers for your local area. Now here is Micah Losh, author of Mentally Diseased. Hello, Micah, and welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here today to add your story and experiences on growing up in the Jehovah's Witnesses to the podcast catalogue. You've recently published your memoir, Mentally Diseased, which is available to purchase today, and I am looking forward to exploring the writing with you and with the listeners. Would you like to start by introducing yourself?
Hi, Casey. Yeah, my name is Micah Losh. Thanks for having me on.
We've talked a lot about the Jehovah's Witnesses, and it's always interesting to get different perspectives on people's experiences, because the blueprint for every congregation is exactly the same by design, but Kingdom Halls always look slightly different, and congregations are made up of completely different people, and they exist all over the world. So I think it would be really nice today if we could start by going over a brief history of the organization. I don't think I've done that for a while, even though there's been a few episodes on this subject that I've done recently. So would you mind giving us, as you understand it, a brief history of the Jehovah's Witnesses?
Yeah, I think it was the late 1800s. It began as the Bible student movement. And of course, I was born into it, and I really was isolated from everybody who didn't share my faith. But one of the things it, they rely on certain dates, but it's also they have this theory of new light where anything they have, if they predicted Armageddon, which they have numerous times, they always excuse it and say, well, that's old light, which means that was our current understanding of scripture at the time. So a lot of the publications that I grew up with are antiquated, or we got new songs sometime after, I think it was around maybe 2010. And it's odd because I'm 40, but in that time I saw so much change because when I was a kid, anything similar to televangelism was despised. And then they came out with JW.org and really got into that. And they started making maybe sometimes they kind of come close to Christian rock and making these music videos. And just I really watched it morph into something that I don't recognize, but my brain was shut off, so I rationalized like, oh well, yeah, we're getting closer to God. And but why would God mislead his true followers? I never, that's just one of many questions that I never had in my head.
You mentioned that this was something that you were born into.
Hmm.
So, do you have any recollection of how your parents or how their parents became involved? And did your parents meet inside or outside of the Jehovah's Witnesses?
So my parents they met at the swimming pool in their apartment complex. My mom told me that she thought my dad looked really angry, which that's just a genetic thing because I always am hearing that. But they met in the 70s, and I was born in 82 in December. So in between that time, I think I know they met Jehovah's Witnesses. I don't know if they came to their door. No one else on either side of the family was a Jehovah's Witness. My mom told me that my parents were baptized simultaneously, and the following year, the organization said it needs to be one at a time because it's a personal decision. And I've tried to find online, I've even asked on Reddit and Twitter, and nobody really knows an exact year. I don't think it's written down anywhere. But what really troubles me about that is in 1975 at a convention, Jehovah's Witnesses, they said stay alive until 75. Paraphrasing, but a brother from the stage said, shower this dying world in magazines during these last few months. People gave away their savings, quit their jobs, and then there was, I don't know exact numbers, but quite a few people left because that was just the final straw for them. So I don't know if my parents joined before that, after it, as it was happening, and I can't ask now. But I believe somebody just knocked on their door.
I don't know that I've heard anybody talk yet about how their families were not involved at all, and that parents became involved together after having kind of no um pre-exposure to the witnesses or another high demand religious group before that. Typically it's one family is involved and they convert the other spouse,
Mhm.
and then they can be together once the other spouse is converted, or there's a long lineage of family involvement, making yourself sort of like a third or fourth generation Jehovah's Witness. So I'm not sure that
Yeah.
I've heard anything similar to your story before. And from some of the writing that I've read from your new memoir, Mentally Diseased, it sounds as if your mum at least threw herself into the Jehovah's Witnesses with everything that she had. Would you say that that's a fair assumption?
Yes. And kind of my view is now when my mother was 5, her mother died of breast cancer. When my mother was 37, her twin brother died of brain cancer. Um, when she was a girl, she had a 9-year-old sister who died and a 14-year-old sister who died. I believe one of them was killed by rheumatic fever. My father was a child of 7. He was abused in every way imaginable. And even at one time, they lived in Brooklyn, Indiana, which I've never been there, but everybody who has says there's a giant dump. And my dad lived in that dump as a child. The whole family did. My dad spoke about rats crawling over him, biting him at night. I'm sure he went to bed hungry. And one thing Jehovah's Witnesses do is prey on vulnerable people. Even within, I think it was the last 10 years, they told people to go to graveyards, and when somebody is mourning, push propaganda on them. I know Jehovah's Witnesses, even my mother, who will go through the obituaries and write letters to people who've just buried someone they love. It is a insidious, predatory cult, and I think that my parents came from such horrible trauma that the message they offered was appealing. And I mean, I really don't know any of my family on either side. My mother pretty much cut off her side of the family. We would maybe see some of them once a year. And my dad came from um, such an abusive environment. I very rarely saw those people too. So all I had was my parents and the congregation. Everyone in my life reinforced this belief, and that was very powerful to me. But outside of their traumatic childhoods, I can't imagine why they would join.
Your mother grew up surrounded by constant grief and heartbreak.
Yeah.
I think that must do something to the mind and make you question, almost put you in a place of existentialism, questioning your own kind of life and how long you might be here for, and
Mhm.
how many more people might you lose. Is there a specific doctrine or teaching that the Jehovah's Witnesses have that might help calm some of those thoughts that your mum might have been having around her eternal soul?
Absolutely, because the resurrection after um, Armageddon, they believe, the world will be restored to a paradise earth, and your dead loved ones will be resurrected. Uh, that's after my father's death. That's what kept me tethered to the religion. I wanted my dad back, and I believed that was the only avenue there was. And I tolerated, I it's really difficult because I feel like you cannot grieve when your dead loved one is essentially dangled before you like a carrot, because you always think Armageddon is imminent. So you can't process or deal with anything because you're always thinking, well, tomorrow it could happen. And even when I was a child, I prayed at night for my God, Jehovah, to bring an end to his enemies. But what that meant was him committing genocide against 99% of the population. And I knew it meant him killing everybody at school, just everyone everywhere. And you're okay. I mean, you're okay with it because you ask. I mean, you're afraid you don't want to be murdered, but um I mean, for me, my mindset was, even if it meant the death of billions, I was fine with it because I wanted my father back. It's a selfish, ugly admission, but it's true.
You're a very vulnerable individual at that point, though, who is susceptible to influence and certain messages during those developmental stages, that if you are told that there is a way for you to have your father back, I don't think it's I don't know. I think it's only natural for you to perhaps consider l- wanting those events to play out. If you truly
Yeah.
believed, because you're being taught that there is a way to reconnect with your father. I remember Erica Bourneman, who wrote a memoir called Mission of Malice. She was talking about how her father passed away when she was young, and they were really, really close. And the leader of her abusive Christian mission came straight to her and told her that the only way that she will be reunited with her father is if she confesses every sin. And so she had to sit there with this person immediately after her father passed away and make things up, which is, a sin in itself because she's not telling the truth,
Yeah.
because this person wouldn't accept that she, wasn't a sinful person. I can't, how traumatic that must be for a child to have the passing of a loved one and then also to have to go through these motions. It feels like I think I said it was akin to sort of like relationship or family hostage taking. They're holding
Mhm.
your relationship with your father hostage to further their own agenda in terms of making you deployable in the church. And that is, as you said, it's insidious. It's despicable, really. You're a vulnerable individual.
Yeah.
And then, people wonder why people leave, even though they have the horrible shunning policies and whatnot.
Yeah.
Um, so there's a clear message that might have been attractive for your mum. And then on your father's side, there's the promise of, in Jehovah's Witnesses, of family and community, and everybody is a brother and everybody is a sister. Do you think that maybe this might have been what was sort of attractive for your father?
Maybe. I know that my dad, he was a mail carrier. He would work part-time jobs. I mean, we grew up pretty well off, and then even uh but my dad always helped people. I remember one night he brought a woman home. Her car had broken down on the highway, this young girl, and I remember the girl looked like, I think like she was just in a desperate situation. So she took a ride, and then when she came in and saw his wife and son, and I remember waving at her. She kind of looked relieved, because she was just stranded back before cell phones. But my parents were both that way, and I remember my dad telling me it's important to stand up for people who aren't as strong as you or whatever. But um, and another thing that reinforced my belief is, as my father was dying, he had cancer and a rare kidney disease called IgA nephropathy. So he was on chemotherapy, and they couldn't really like localize it like they do now. So the radiation, it just he aged like 40 years. He was 47 when he died, but that year he just looked 90. And they offered my dad a blood transfusion, which of course is, persona non grata, and he refused it. And would it have saved him? Probably not, but would it have maybe given me a few more weeks or days, hours? Maybe. But he didn't even try. He died loyal to God. And I hated God for that because, Jehovah's Witnesses, they teach time and unforeseen occurrence, anytime anything bad happens, but then they will also cherry pick events and say, oh, we see Jehovah's hand in this. I remember once there was like a tropical storm, and all this sand showed up where they needed it for this construction project on this island, and they couldn't get it. But worldly people died. Well, that didn't matter, because they're Armageddon fodder anyway. They didn't even address that. They just said, God can move sand, but he didn't save my father. And I always knew that scripture, God will not give you more than you can handle, or that saying. I would hear things like that, and just they were repugnant to me, and I really began to resent God. But due to my training, that was my sin, my imperfection. How dare I be angry at God? And I really began to hate myself.
I'm really sorry, Micah, that you lost your father at such a young age. I can't imagine how much that must have affected you, but also your mother as well, who's experienced so much loss through cancer as well in her life. It's a horrible thing to lose close family members, but with children, it's a whole other thing. And
Yeah.
I think it's it's really difficult to untangle your commitment to the Jehovah's Witnesses that almost becomes a non-commitment through the passing of your father. So it's like a thing to untangle, isn't it? Which I know is, part
Yeah.
and parcel of writing a memoir and exploring all of these things. And in the early chapters of the book, um, whereas some of this you just mentioned your training kicked in the early chapters of the book. I think there is some evidence of this training starting really early on for you, because through your through your child eyes, we're able to see that you're already a devoted Jehovah's Witness from a young age. So I wondered
Mhm.
if you could talk the listeners through how that was able to happen, what that was like for you as a child, and those differences between yourself and perhaps worldly children that you were not able to connect with.
Yeah, well, so I never wanted to go to school. I remember when I was I went to kindergarten when I was 6 because I was born in December. But you were told you were no part of the world. And not only that, you have to make a stand for God. So you're going into school knowing there is going to be a giant target. I did not stand for the pledge. And essentially, you have to be fearless because if you deny God, he'll deny you. And also, if I have, oh, well, what they tell the children is school is your territory. So if I have life-saving information, like if God spoke to me and said, "Oh, everyone wearing a hoodie is going to be killed," I would be like, "Hey, maybe you should change your shirt." Like why would you not try and save people's life if you can? But you're hated because they're celebrating birthdays and you're not, and also you're told every opportunity you need to take a stand. So I would say, well, I don't celebrate birthdays because, and I would go further because God doesn't believe. And it just it's horrific. I hated going to school. I would cry on my knees pleading, and I would tell my parents, even as a kid, I tried to rationalize. I'm like, you were not Jehovah's Witnesses. You don't know what it's like. Please. I even said, I would go to, like, I would preach full time and do homeschooling. But I was never allowed to not go, and it's just awful because there's 10 million things you're going to hear. You can't say, God bless you. You can't curse. You can't tell dirty jokes. You can't watch art movies. So every time you're hearing these things, there's essentially a gun to your head because you're thinking, okay, if I don't try and help them and save them, I'm going to be blood guilty and Jehovah will kill me. And it's really psychotic to think that those thoughts existed in my head as a 6-year-old, because it's overwhelming now to think about feeling that. And that's probably why I mean, I have almost barely any memories before I was 13. I would say maybe 10, and a lot of them, several of them are just quick flashes of things. I don't know if it's because it wasn't memorable, because it was perpetual deja vu, or if it's just a trauma response and my brain doesn't want me to remember it.
Sometimes when I talk to people who have experienced a high demand religious group, or a strict set of religious teachings that means that they don't join in with things like Christmas celebrations, Halloween celebrations, birthday parties, they'll always say, I had to step out of the class and it was me and one other kid who was a Jehovah's Witness. Do you remember anybody else in the school with you that didn't participate in any of those things, or was it just you as an individual?
So there was, when I was young, no. And then I do remember there was one girl in my class, but I mean, it seems she was born without a personality. I mean, I say that as politely, like just, and she never really interacted with me, but also after my father died and I had depression, that kind of indicates that you're not good enough. So, as a Jehovah's Witness, I was always an outcast, but then even among the outcasts, I really was a pariah. So the memories I have of that there was just this growing rift and divide among me and other Jehovah's Witnesses. So very rare. Sometimes we would go to the library. I do remember once a few of us, but yeah, I mean, it was school was very lonely.
People talk often about the us versus them mentality that is implemented in high demand groups to reinforce the connection of followers to the leader or
Mhm.
of followers to the doctrine. And I think that sometimes it's important to highlight the emphasized us versus them that happens internally. And I think there's a good case of that here, where with the foreword of your book, there's a segment from an individual who wrote about remembering you in the Jehovah's
Yeah.
Witnesses, wondering why everybody saw you in such a bad way, especially after you left. After leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses, it's easier to understand, if you know the teachings, why there would be a certain rhetoric around, oh, Micah's this person and Micah's that person, and we don't associate with Micah because he has, he's left Jehovah behind, and whatever
Mhm.
ways the group might word it. But you're talking about actually feeling that us versus them divide when you were inside the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Oh yeah, all Jehovah's Witnesses are equal, but some are more equal than others. I mean, the women, it's really another a friend I've made in the past couple years, Natalie Grand. She wrote a comic book called Cult Girls. Very supportive, really sweet lady. And when I was reading it, and I spent 37 years in this, but it never fully registered to me like how many little girls that I made feel inferior, just thinking I was, doing what I was supposed to do. You're running mics, you're giving talks, and the women, they have to cover their head if they pray in front of you. And I even remember one time we were meeting for service, and uh, there's like a 40 some year old woman, and I'm 15, you know, and I had to like pray and direct the service, very uncomfortable because you're obviously an adult. I'm But there's that, and then there's also, you know, if you're not happy, then that really equates evil. Even though they say Jehovah is close to the depressed hearted one and all this, it's not true because um, you're living the best life ever. They even have stickers and all kinds of merch now with that. Um, you're serving the happy God, even though if you look in the Bible at God, he seems bipolar and, he's like a complete sociopath. So if you're not perfectly reflecting that, you are evil. And I started to hear like be told I needed to get over my father. People didn't know why it affected me so much. I even remember at my dad's funeral, someone told me, I know how you feel. And I looked over and I saw their father talking. Mine's in a box. You don't know anything. I've always hated when people say that just has always stuck with me because, I mean, but it's such a toxic culture because if you're not happy for a prolonged period of time, then you are really just assumed to be evil and you're pushed out. And um and I was always a tad rebellious. I have what, 19 tattoos. I think I got all of them while I was going to meetings or trying, and I would wear short sleeves. I just thought, and they cherry pick, the women can't, the women have to dress modest, but like I would get called into meetings for wearing all black too much. Why are you wearing black? It's my favorite color. And but there's nothing wrong with that, but they nitpick you to death. Or I mean, I used to have long sideburns. I mean, they were ridiculous, like down to my jawline. And I kind of spiked my hair. Well, that get called into the back room. Then when I start shaving my head, well, why are you shaving your head? And they'll, like I said, they'll just cherry pick because certain unhealthy habits are okay. And then other things, they just have to be criminalized. And if you don't, you just have to conform. It's like some people call the organization the Borg, like in Star Trek. And it's true because a lot of it's even funny when I watch YouTube videos, certain ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, I know who they are. Some of them, I know exactly their life. They wore khaki suits. They were popular. Their grandparents and aunts and uncles, they were all in, and they had this great life and then other people were just degenerate pieces of trash that no one talked to or acknowledged. And I experienced that for decades. Sorry, I ramble.
No, that was a really great example of how the us versus them mentality it's not exclusive. I'm sorry, it's not exclusive to us worldly people and us as witnesses. It's not exclusive to
Well,
that, because it happens in hierarchies and layers inside high demand religious groups as well, with gossiping and with people looking down on others, and with the whole the almost the total surveillance of people kind of offering information on others and spying on people. And as you said, it's not everyone is equal, because these layers and of I know that there is an actual hierarchical structure,
yeah.
but it it's there's like a social hierarchy as well inside these
Oh,
these types of groups.
absolutely. And you in certain congregations, they say that they'll be like, oh, what we're learning in America is what we're learning in the UK and in Zimbabwe, and it's just perfect and equal, but it's not. I've attended a few congregations long term, and even among those congregations, I saw differences in how it was run. And, because they speak about conscience matters, because all, non-believers will pretty much be killed. Now, the wages sin pays are death. So if you're murdered at Armageddon by God, he can resurrect you and then you can serve him forever. But also, just being a Jehovah's Witness, being baptized does not guarantee your survival. So you're not only constantly trying to analyze yourself. I remember one time I dropped a can on my foot and I cussed. And then as I'm laying in bed, I'm like, well, was that like what if Armageddon comes tomorrow and I cursed and I'm this much further away from Jehovah and I get killed? But you also in the congregation, you're always trying to be good enough for them too. And it's exhausting. And it, it's just really perverse. You're kept so busy and so afraid, you can never stop and think, do I really believe this? Or is it just horrible? Is it making me miserable? Because once you buy into that, the immortality, I do think that is what keeps most people there. You also have the people with large families and the shunning, and they do foster codependency. Because in my congregation, there was a brother who had a business. Well, he employed half the elders and all the like, I don't know, guys who looked like Hollister model. I mean, just like if you looked a certain way or you had, like, in my opinion, terrible taste in clothing and music, you were in the get along gang. But like me, I like heavy metal and black and muscle cars. So I'm a piece of garbage. And it, it's just crazy that I believed, that I could go to Russia and it would be exactly the same. I really bought into that, but it's not true. It's not even true. Some buildings have multiple congregations that meet, and there's just differences. You will have certain things will be okay, and also elders display favoritism to their children. I mean, one person, oh, I looked at pornography. Well, you need to be disfellowshipped. But then their daughter has slept with half the congregation and never got in trouble. Hypocrisy is rampant. It's just like any clergy.
You grew up without conforming to the I don't know, you'd say the
Well,
modesty aesthetic.
it was like, I mean, I guess maybe I was always a contrarian, a bit of a rebel, but just certain things seemed real stupid. Well, for me, like now after my dad died, I started eating a lot, and by the time I was 18, I weighed 300 pounds. Now, one of the things, they tell overweight people wear all black. It's slimming. So I like to wear black, but it was always like, I remember I got called into a meeting and they're like, why are you wearing black so much? And I'm like, because I like black. And they're, I'm like, show me in the Bible where it says the black is related to Satan or evil. If Jehovah created all the colors, I'm like, we have black people here. So, and they're like, oh, I would kind of push the envelope and be like, are you offended by that? And then they'd be like, well, that's disrespectful. But I would ask kind of absurd questions to prove my point, which I think is part of my being raised. Jesus spoke in parables and illustrations. So I would just make really absurd or mildly offensive ones. But I remember I told one guy, I said, and of course, homosexuals deserve death. And Jehovah's Witnesses believe that, But I told him, I said, you dress very, very gay. Like you look like a gay man, and pastel floral colors. And it's like, but I don't project that on you or accuse you of being gay. I mean, so it's like, so why am I in trouble for wearing dark colors? Because that what does that mean about anybody? If you're a decent, it's just they're so focused on that. Or and another problem in this society is um a lot of people are really morbidly obese, and they even will go so far as to say, what is like physical health is good for some things, but spiritual health, whatever, is good for far more. So, some people are really kind of mistreated for exercising, taking care of themselves because they can have this perfect body and life in the new system. But it's just weird because, you'll have people who and I mean, if you go to the congregations, a lot of time the handicap seating, it's just people who are 4, 5, 600 pounds, which is not healthy, and nothing's said about that. Even though if you read the Bible, I mean, whether or not it's gluttony, I remember one time they said it's not about if you're eating too much or if your health is bad. It's about your opinion towards food. They said, like, are you missing meetings to eat? Which is really perverse. Because I knew people who had some really bad health problems, were on oxygen at a young age. They didn't care that their health was bad. Are you coming to meetings? Are you giving us money? Are you proselytizing? It's just, but you're gonna flip out about somebody wearing black clothing. It's nonsensical, and you can't. The house always wins. I tried so many times for years to like have reasonable discussions, but it was always, I'm a complete piece of garbage because I'm not like how you want me to be.
The message of family and community, of helping people, the values that your father had and held, that from the outside looking in is what the organization itself sells people,
Mhm.
is not the reality that you were living once your father had
Mhm.
passed away. I think That's really kind of heartbreaking in itself, isn't it? Because it was never the organization that he thought it was, and the way that you're being treated is never how he would have wanted you, I imagine, to be treated.
Yeah, and he martyred himself for them. Watchtower killed my father in my mind. Yes, he was dying of cancer, but he did not pursue every avenue available to him, and I needed my father. And you know, uh, I don't, yeah, I don't know what to do with that. And he's not the only one. There are children. Even after he died, my mom, 3 years later, my mom had breast cancer. Um, she had her thyroid removed. She had cysts cut out of her arm.
Oh,
She had like I think 7 or 8 surgeries in like the decade following his death. And every time that happened, I mean, she was all I had, and the congregation didn't like me, didn't want me. So that was just very difficult. My that I became very suicidal, and I miss my dad, which it got to a point where I that was like criminalized. I should be over it, and I didn't understand. And then my mom's having all these issues, and a lot of times and I didn't mind, but I would come home at night and she's recuperating, so I would check on her, maybe bring her some food, and people from the congregation would help too. But I was just worried that she would die as well.
the help that the congregation was giving to your mother, this is something that I've always struggled with. It's conditional on her remaining within the organization. Do you think she would have still received that help from her fellow congregants if she said that she was no longer going to be a practicing Jehovah's Witness?
Oh, of course not. I know she wouldn't have. I've experienced that. Um, they do not care at all. Um, they do not care what happens. It is all about bringing people in. And it's very difficult because there are only a handful of people. I mean, I can count on one hand how many people I miss that are Jehovah's Witnesses. And I feel ambivalence because the pain and the anger and the mistreatment, but I also know they didn't know any better. And I don't think I did. I mean, there were people I loved who were disfellowshipped when I was young, and I didn't speak to them. I, I thought that's the way it was. I thought that was God's plan. And even though a lot of times I was like, I'm sitting there thinking this is the best God can do, you know, but when you've been conditioned to think that that's your sinful inclination and that's your rebellious spirit, because you were born imperfect and that's how Satan is, you have those thoughts, but you dismiss them almost as quickly as they come in. And they can reside in your head, but for me, I just never analyzed them. I never seriously considered everything because it's survival oriented. You're told you're involved in a life-saving work, and you have to be constantly moving. They even tell you do not become self-satisfied, and they set people up for failure because there's only 7 days, 24 hours in each day, but they act like you need to have exponential growth. Well, it doesn't happen, especially if you get married or you have kids or God forbid, have hobbies. You just don't have the time. So it's just impossible to exist and not hate yourself, whether or not you know it. You just do.
And that creates the inner turmoil that you were talking about before, where it's a battle between being happy, but in your mind you're not happy, which you're then associating as being sinful, and then trying not to do that, which is deepening the issues with ill mental health. That is for an individual to kind of go through internally, I imagine very difficult, especially when you're still trying to commit yourself to the
Yeah.
organization.
Yeah, and so my father died in 1996. Less than 4 months later, at the age of 13, I was baptized. Now, you look at your brain, your prefrontal cortex, which is involved in decision making, is fully developed at 25. What did I know about my life? I was 13. For all I could have been gay. And then if I realize that after I'm baptized, I'm going to get disfellowshipped. So they encourage child baptism. They want that because it's a hostage situation at that point. If you have somebody that you love, you there are all kinds of people that are just trapped in it. I mean, I've talked to them online. They're called PMOs, physically in, mentally out, which I cannot imagine the terror, the constant paralytic terror you would feel constantly wondering if you're going to be outed. I just can't imagine that. It must be, it's like they're a secret agent almost, because and it's tattletale culture, because if you and I are in the congregation and you've done something bad and I know it, well, then I share in your sin and God will kill us both. So, they can turn married couples against each other. They can turn families, children. It Your emotions are weaponized. I always think of, have you ever seen The Green Mile?
Yeah.
When he abducts the two little girls and he says, if you say anything, I'm going to kill her, and if you say anything, I'm going to kill your sister. That's what they do to Jehovah's Witnesses. It's just, you think you think it's like real life and death because you can live forever, and it stops you from thinking. You're just obedient and you're survival oriented, and it's a hamster wheel.
It's everything you've said combined with the previous conversations that we've had around being so busy and not having a chance to sit still and wondering if you're being perfect, and then wondering if other people are being perfect, and then if they're not, then you need to do something about that. It's everything, isn't it? And it's designed that
Yeah.
way to stop you from being able to take a step back and say, how come how come how come women have to wear veils, and or whatever thing you want to
Yeah.
pull out,
Or
how come my father didn't want to accept a blood transfusion?
yeah, it's like they say, JWs say they're living the best life ever, while at the same time they say this isn't the real life is paradise. Well, you can't have it both ways. But you know I feel like that slogan came out about 10 years ago maybe, and I never questioned it. I never once. It was within the last year I was like, wow, what cognitive dissonance I maintained, because those things completely contradict one another. But it's all about illusion, and Jehovah's Witnesses are very, very fake, and they're circumscribed and contrived, especially if you're born in. You're really not allowed to fully develop, because there are parameters and you can only come up to those edges, and if you step out, then you'll be expelled. And just some of the fakest people I've ever
Yeah.
spent
But
time.
you've mentioned going towards those parameters though, and being treated differently for that, not adhering to dress codes, or or attitude, which I'm saying in air quotes that people can't see, but I'm, in regards to ill mental health, depression, difficulties with suicidal ideation. Your attitude is being looked at as something that's a problem for the Jehovah's Witnesses,
Mhm.
something that shouldn't be happening. If you were a good Jehovah's Witness, you wouldn't be feeling this way. It's cognitive dissonance, again, in so many different ways. But when you mentioned the physically in, mentally out individuals who are like double agents, I feel like every single person in a high demand religious group is living double lives. There's the person that they are when they're in the congregation, like a facade that they present to other
Oh yeah.
people. And then there's like oh, actually, do you know what, let's watch Harry Potter when we get home, but not tell anyone that we're watching Harry Potter when we get home. And I think even the people that are the most devout individuals to their respective religious groups do some things that would be deemed
Oh,
as sinful. I don't know how you
well,
can be as perfect the
oh.
as the teachings expect you to be.
Yeah, I mean, you can. They set you up for failure, 100%. And every time you fail, it instills guilt in you, and that just keeps feeding the cycle. Because I mean, you're right. I remember one time I was talking to elders about listening to Ozzy Osbourne, and afterwards, an elder told me, he said, "Oh, I listen to Ozzy. I just don't talk about it." And I said, "Well, you're fake and you're a hypocrite, and I don't respect that." And I but for me, of course, then I was judgmental and arrogant, and I needed to be humbled before Jehovah. And yeah, but you're right. Even the most devout, everybody makes mistakes, but very few people want to obey all those rules.
That is the end of part 1. To get a hold of Micah Losh's book, Mentally Diseased, you can follow the links in the episode description. And to get in touch with me, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault Podcast.